Hello, and welcome to my show. My name is Carolyn. I am a creative entrepreneur who loves to analyze everything about up-and-coming startups in the tech world. Today, we need to talk about Elizabeth Holmes Theranos, their ongoing trial, and how Holmes's actions negatively impacted female founders, especially in MedTech. The consequences of Elizabeth Holmes's actions last to this day, and if VCs don't do anything about it, we are going to see substantially less innovation in the MedTech space and substantially less opportunities for women pursuing their medical technology dreams. Want to learn more? Let's get started. We're gonna have some fun today. What? Here's what you need to know. To the moon! To the moon! Okay, so just a heads up, this video isn't going to be a deep dive on Elizabeth Holmes or on Theranos and just like what happened with those crazy shenanigans. I assume that if you're already watching this, you already know what happened. And if you don't for some reason, I would highly recommend that you Google it or read John Carreyrou's Bad Blood or watch HBO's The Inventor. All of those are phenomenal resources. There's also plenty of YouTube videos diving in to learn about this scandal. It was a massive deal in Silicon Valley. I'm gonna touch on it a little bit, but this isn't gonna be, you know, the history of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. We are specifically laser focusing on how Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos have damaged the reputation of female founders in Silicon Valley and have made it even harder than ever for female founders in the medtech space in particular to get funding from VCs. But as a very quick refresher of what happened, in case any of you need a reminder, here's the story. Elizabeth Holmes is the former founder and CEO of the now defunct health technology company. Theranos was basically a blood diagnostics testing company. They were trying to build a way to make blood testing simpler, less cost intensive, and not nearly as invasive. So instead of drawing like several different vials of blood to be used in blood testing, they created a tool that basically would allow you to like get a finger prick of blood and put it in a machine that would theoretically perform all of the same tests as a traditional blood diagnostics company. So instead of using several vials of blood for blood diagnostics testing, they were hoping to use a finger prick's worth of blood and do the exact same amount of testing in a small machine. There was just one problem. The product didn't work and Theranos lied to their investors, partners, and customers. Elizabeth Holmes was just 19 years old when she dropped out of Stanford to build Theranos and was frequently dubbed the next Steve Jobs in medical technology, specifically because of her habit of wearing black turtlenecks. Which, as someone who lives in a cold climate and not Silicon Valley, who loves black turtlenecks, this is deeply upsetting. By 2015, Forbes had announced that Elizabeth Holmes was the youngest and wealthiest self-made female billionaire and could be found absolutely everywhere. She was on the cover of magazines, she was on TV, she was in every newspaper article talking about MedTech. I mean, even myself, who wasn't in the startup space at the time, I was a comedian, I knew about Elizabeth Holmes and thought she was the freaking coolest. However, just a year later, it was revealed that Theranos had committed massive fraud. Their product didn't work, they lied about it, and they gave false medical testing evidence, whatever, to customers and put several thousand lives in danger. If you haven't looked into it already, seriously, like dig into it. It was a massive disaster that featured all sorts of crazy things like famous politicians, crazy aggressive lawyers, Walgreens, a former Secretary of State, military generals, and a whole lot more. It was a really jaw-dropping show of fraud. The whole situation was a big wake-up call for Silicon Valley, basically proving that you can't fake it until you make it when it comes to medical technology, especially when you're working with real human subjects. This isn't just a fun app, guys. So why are we talking about it now? Elizabeth Holmes is finally on trial this week. The jury has been selected and she is now running with the defense that her former ex-boyfriend and former Theranos executive was sexually and emotionally abusing her and took advantage of this situation. Which, we're not gonna dig into that today because that is a lot. But the point is, Elizabeth Holmes is back in the news and her case is fresh in the mind of VCs in Silicon Valley and around the world. Holmes helped lead the girl boss wave in the early 2010s, and investors really bought into that narrative, especially because the disparity between men and women when it comes to investments in Silicon Valley is so vast. Investors wanted to be the good guys and wanted to be part of the narrative of empowering female founders and making a change for the better. So let's talk some stats. 2020 was a record-breaking year when it came to startup funding, with a total of $156 billion invested in startups. Despite the rest of the world and kind of Silicon Valley being literally on fire. However, female founders actually took a major step back compared to 2019, only raising 14.4% of that amount, a total of about $22 billion. Compared to the 16.9% that women raised in 2019, it was really not looking too good. However, that statistic doesn't show the whole story. That study found that 14.4% raised was for startups who had at least one female founder. Startups led by all female teams only raised 2.2%. All right, 2.2% of funding compared to the 2.8% that they raised the year before in 2019, which was previously the all-time high ever. This trend has been going on for decades and really isn't too surprising. Only about 12% of decision makers at VCs are women, and most VCs don't have any female partners at all. And when women venture capitalists do make decisions, they are twice as likely to invest in female-founded teams. So it's not that there are just infinitely more male founders in the world than female founders, though there definitely is a disparity when it comes to those numbers. We're really seeing a bias when it comes to these investors. And fun fact, when investors do invest in female-led startups, they are twice as likely to be as successful as startups run by men and are substantially more likely to earn more revenue and be more successful in general. So basically, across the board, women are substantially less likely to receive funding and therefore are substantially less likely to make their startup dreams come true or become massively successful because of it, which leads to, less VCs and whatnot in the space. Now, this is for a variety of issues that we are not going to dig into today, but what's become clear is Elizabeth Holmes is now a brand new hoop that a lot of female founders have to deal with when trying to raise funding from VCs. Erin Griffith of the New York Times wrote a great article just a couple of weeks ago about how female founders, especially in the MedTech space in Silicon Valley, are having a really difficult time getting funding from venture capitalists. Female founders who have been seeking funding in the MedTech space have been fielding questions about Elizabeth Holmes now for years. Alice Zhang, the founder of Verge Genomics, an artificial intelligence company that helps the discovery of therapeutics drugs, time and time again found VCs and reporters comparing her to Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Heather Bowerton, the founder of Dot Lab, which develops tests to help identify endometriosis, found herself needing to explain to VCs how her company would be different from Theranos, even though they really have nothing in common. Her experience trying to get funding from VCs was so bad that she ended up basically giving up on venture capitalists in Silicon Valley for the time being and only started trying to get smaller amounts of funding from grants from the federal government. Eventually, after a few years and a lot of successful case studies, she ended up getting some funding, but still, venture capitalists who could have been able to invest that early on and see massive profits didn't because of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos comparisons. Julia Cheek, the founder of Everly Health, a company that performs at-home health tests, found that the comparisons were so frequent that her colleagues and advisors suggested that she dye her hair a different color instead of blonde to try to stop having the comparisons brought up in every pitch meeting. Can you imagine needing to change your hair color to have a better results with VC firms? Seriously? Would that ever happen with a man? I think you know the answer. Okay, so VCs, I'm gonna call you out here. And listen, I do not think that all of you are the enemy. In fact, I don't think VCs as a category are the enemy. I get it. It's fun to make fun of Elizabeth Holmes. How could all of these people, some really impressive investors, some of the most powerful people in the company, become so smitten with Holmes that they were able to pull off this fraud for years? But we also need to recognize that change is needed and is needed fast. After George Floyd's murder last year, a lot of VC firms insisted that they were going to do better by everyone. But if we really want to see diversity improve in Silicon Valley and across the country, change is needed across the board if we want to see more women, more people of color, people of different gender identities, sexualities, or even neurodiversity in the field. We want different people from around the world and the country to succeed, because the more ideas get funded and the more work that people are able to accomplish, the better the future is going to be for everyone. Finding people who have drastically different perspectives, who don't necessarily look like you, who don't necessarily have the same background for you, is critical for innovation and is one of the key ways that we're going to be able to solve problems for future generations. But at the same time, the answer isn't also to just throw money at every single person you meet. I want to encourage you to seek out founders who are different and listen to founders who maybe you wouldn't have expected or wouldn't have considered before. And pay attention to any internal biases that you may have. We all have them. There's nothing wrong with that as long as we are conscious about them and do something about it. Let people prove you wrong by going above and beyond. Remember to ask questions, not just from the founder who you're talking to, but from other researchers, scientists, or professors who you trust to give you a really strong background on whether their products might actually work. And don't just start cracking jokes every time you meet another female founder who works in the MedTech space and is maybe wearing a black turtleneck. Be smart, do your due diligence, and ask for expert opinions. Theranos happened because investors were enamored by a beautiful, intelligent, and persuasive female founder who was selling a dream. Everybody wanted Theranos to succeed because it was going to improve the future for the better. But anyone who had done the due diligence, who had, say, called a handful of professors at Stanford or MIT or any other engineers that they would have known, would have realized that the technology that Theranos was trying to build was not physically possible. They would have asked why Theranos hadn't published anything in peer-reviewed journals, something that basically all scientists and engineers who are building new things do in order to have other studies and other people contributing to their work to find any loopholes or gaps or things that they could be improved upon. Theranos skipped this critical step and was unusual for doing so. They never got outside opinions from people who weren't hand-selected by Theranos' team. Look for founders who are going above and beyond, working with the science and getting backing from the scientific community, and not just someone who's an incredible saleswoman. Here are my final thoughts. So while you're watching the Theranos trial and rooting for justice to be made, don't forget to support the women and other game changers in your lives and support them with their projects. Do your due diligence, listen to experts, and don't invent new hoops for women or People who are different from you due to their race, ethnicity, gender identity, or sexuality, or even neurodiversity. Everyone deserves a shot. Check your assumptions and keep your mind open. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a little bit different than usual, but at this point I'm doing so many different things that I'm not sure what normal is anymore. Let me know if you liked this video. Feel free to give it a like or a comment to help boost that algorithm. I post videos every Tuesday about startups and tech, so if you like this video, subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye!